Welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Our theme for 2026 continues. The future of work, meaning is the new money. Because meaning is simply the greatest motivational force on earth. But 68% of the global workforce is disengaged, leaving $9.6 trillion in productivity on the table every year. Gen Z, the canary in the coal mine, is exposing structural failures everyone else learned to ignore, rationalize, or endure. I'm Dr. John Dentico, your host, bringing over 30 years of experience in leadership, strategic thinking, and designing solutions that solve real problems. This podcast delivers boots-on-the-ground intelligence, real conversations with CEOs, fractional executives, coaches, and small and medium-sized business leaders navigating the same crisis, mitigating the talent hemorrhage before competitive viability disappears. We go beyond symptoms like engagement scores and wellness programs to focus on the structural failures beneath them. Frontline intelligence, actionable frameworks, hard truths. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Now let's throttle up and dive into today's episode. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. This is your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me today is Dr. Matt Chodkowski, who has spent 45 years asking a question most organizations still can't answer. What if everything we think we know about leadership is built on an industrial age framework that no longer works? I have asked this question myself many times. Dr. Matt is the founding director of the Institute for Post-Industrial Leadership, a consultant, researcher, and educator who has taught leadership, organizational behavior, and human resources across 8 colleges and universities, including Western Michigan, Purdue, Ball State, State University, New York at Stony Brook, over a 35-year academic career. In the private sector, he's held roles from general manager to chief operating officer to board director, and has designed and facilitated organizational change interventions at every scale. His LEAD, or LEAD program, has reached over 2,000 participants, and his recent article in Cadmus, the Journal of the World Academy of Art and Science, lays out his case for reconceptualizing leadership entirely. His core conviction is as simple as it is radical. Leadership is collaboration in action. An organizational culture transforms one person at a time, not through mandates, but through discovery. He's currently writing Beyond Leadership, and I think you're about to hear why. I'm truly pleased, honored, and delighted to have Dr. Chodkowski with me this morning. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Morning, John. I'm doing well, and thank you for this invite and opportunity.
Oh, you are most welcome. Now, for the sake of being upfront and honest with my audience, I want to just do a little bit of a lead in here before we get started, and that is that Matt and I share a common bond. And that common bond is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Joseph Rost, who, sad to say, is no longer with us, who wrote Leadership for the 21st Century, published by Prager in 1993. Joe was the key influence of the leadership studies program at the University of San Diego, where I spent 6.5 years in that doctoral program. I took 4 courses from Joe. He was a mentor. He was a friend. He was my dissertation chair. And he changed my conceptualization of leadership. I can remember one night in the first course so dramatically that it took me about 2 or 3 hours to almost regain control of my mind because it had been shifted so radically. I would say that Joe has written arguably the single greatest theoretical study of leadership ever undertaken. And I would defend that to the death because it really went into leadership in a way that others had never even thought about doing. So Matt and I share that common bond. So that's just my front introduction folks. So I'd like to begin our podcast this morning by asking Matt my favorite question, and that is, Matt, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? And what were some of the key influences in your life?
You did a great job on the introduction, better than I probably could have done. What I can add is maybe some personal information. I was born in Buffalo, New York, the east side of Buffalo. I guess you could refer to it back then anyway as a Polish ghetto. And had a pretty good upbringing, I thought. I mean, we were just regular lower middle class people. But I got involved, like many people, I'm sure, I got involved in things like the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts. I was working pretty early in life. I had a paper route. Again, a lot of this, I'm sure, is common to many people, maybe my age. It was always focused on self-development. We had a lot of music in the family. We had a lot of people that loved reading. I remember sitting around and just talking when family would come around. And I suppose that was part of a good upbringing where we were focused on education. I was drafted in 1968, I believe. Vietnam War was going on then. And instead of going into the Army, I joined the Air Force. I was going to college. I was studying construction technology. I was going to go into the building trades back then. And so I went into the Air Force, and I landed a job that no longer exists. I was running NCO and officers clubs. So at a really early age, again, I was involved in it. Was really running a business. We never wore uniforms. We could have our hair longer. We reported to the base commander. We wore suits all the time. It was a very tough life, though, because I was in the clubs 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Anyway, I got married during that time. My wife didn't like the service, traveling around and things like that, so I got out. But I had to stay in that field for a while until I was able to move out of it. So I was in the hotel business for a few years, went back to school, and I guess everything after that is pretty much history. It picks up to where one in the library, I don't know how many people go to libraries anymore, but I came across the little blue book, the Rost book, and I was doing dissertation at that point. It was probably 1994, I think, and opened it up. The foreword was written by Burns, which really caught my eye, and in the foreword, Burns says that, I don't remember the exact words or the story, but I guess that Rost invited Burns to speak at a class, and he kind of criticized him and his philosophy in front of the class. Then, of course, he wrote the foreword, and then on from there. I sat down on the floor right then and there and skimmed that entire book. And before I left, I went to the copy machine, and I copied the entire book and went home and read it again. So that was the start, because I feel I've only had one original idea in my whole life, and it was never really articulated well, but it went something like this. Leadership could not just be the leader. And he built on that, obviously. And so here we are today talking about Rost and post-industrial leadership.
Yeah, and you answered my first question, and that was, when was the first time you had noticed Rost or had got introduced to him? I will tell you, I have been in the room, lucky to say this, I've been in the room when James McGregor Burns and Joe Rost were in the same room.
Wow.
And got to watch that and I was a doctoral student at the time, and they looked at each other wryly, if you will, but at the same time, they had a great respect for each other. Jim Burns really respected Joe, and Joe really respected Jim Burns, because he knew that Jim was the real pioneer, that he had, because of Jim's work in leadership published in 78. Jim had really started to say there's got to be more to this than just the psychological perspective, because Burns looked at it as a multidisciplinary phenomenon in politics and different kinds of implications of that. And that's what really opened the door for Joe's work. Joe went deep into trying to create, and I think he did a really good job at this, a baseline definition of leadership. What is it? What is the definition of leadership that can be applied across different industries? Because in his book, he cites that I remember this out of hand, 587 books and articles, 221 different definitions of leadership. Well, what is it? Joe asked a simple question. What is it we're trying to do? Yeah. What is it? What is it? So, Matt, let me ask you this question. Joe referred it to post-industrial leadership, and you call it post-industrial leadership. For someone hearing the term for the first time, what's broken about the industrial model we've been running on? And what does the shift actually look like in practice? Why don't we talk about that for a bit?
It's interesting that you focus on the word post-industrial because it's not really a common or popular word in the leadership field. Some people refer to it, but they mean something different. They say post-industrial hyphenated, meaning we're in a new economic era, but that's not obviously what Rost meant. Rost meant that it was more of the 20th century values and beliefs that undergird the whole concept. I had a hard time. I will always use that term for the Institute, but I had a hard time with everyone, even the university that I was at. They didn't like the word. They thought people wouldn't know what it meant. But I consider myself a purist when it comes to Rost, and I still use the term. Here's something that will be a lead-in to answering your question directly. I believe, I'm not too sure a lot of people agree with this, but I have some reason to pose this. I believe in that there was such a thing as an original ontological error, where sometime in the distant past, don't know when exactly, the word leadership was misperceived and misconceptualized as who the leader is and what the leader does. Now, if anyone was to observe something that they thought was leadership, undoubtedly they would see with their own eyes probably something more of a social phenomenon, not an individual. But it's like a heuristic. It was an easy way to explain complex things. That original ontological error actually attributed a social phenomenon to an individual person. And for some reason it stuck. And here we are today still dealing with the same issue. I don't know if you want to get into the definition now, but I need to make a quick comment about definitions. Yeah, everything has to start there. As you pointed out earlier, Rost had identified something like 200 definitions. So that's ridiculous. What other science has 200 definitions for any construct? So it begins with the definition. Now, he had an original definition in 91. He revised it in 97 by removing the word followers, substituting the word collaborators. Now, that word has actually been the main concept that has stood the test of time since the early 90s. I think it's the most researched concept in the field up until now. It's a term that it exponentially went up as far as usage in the literature. So in 2020, I believe, I removed the word leader and just kept the word collaborator to represent all the people in the relationship. As you said in the opening, leadership is like collaboration in action, but it's a special kind of collaboration because there's a word collaboration or collaborate in the dictionary, but it usually means something much more common, just working together. This collaboration is based on mutual purpose, multi-directional, multilateral influence, and on enacting and intending real change. So the difference is that leaders or managers need to change their paradigm, and obviously easy to do, but I believe it begins there. And the definition is one of the ways that we can help people make that shift. In the LEAD program that we developed, one of the first things we do is ask people to define leadership. And then after the entire group does that, we go around the room, they read off their definition, and then no one has ever defined it. I've been doing this for 40 years. And then we explain that what they're really doing is describing leaders, leader characteristics, qualities, things like that. And it's like it creates disequilibrium. And it shocks you a little bit into, oh my goodness, you're right. We've been talking about leaders, not necessarily leadership. That change, hopefully, will prove that collaboration has emerged as the most critical variable in leadership, with, of course, change being the most distinguishing characteristic.
Yeah, I agree. I think have a statement that I encapsulated all it. And the statement I use is leadership is what people do together. And I have related that to people in the leadership world, and it catches them off guard, completely
Yes.
off guard. Leadership is not one person. It's what people do together. It's in a sense the creation of a movement. And it doesn't matter where that movement is. It could be in a business, it could be in politics, it could be anywhere. It's this creation of a movement where many people exert influence to make, and Joe and I had this conversation, this exact conversation about what really was the cutting edge of his definition. What made it really different? And it was more beyond collaboration. And that was real change, transforming change, substantive change. That is the dividing line between leadership and management. Management, incremental change. You need it. You got to have it. It tweaks things. It makes things more efficient. Leadership, much more about effectiveness. That's the difference as far as I see it. It's much more, need both. You need to be effective and you need to be efficient. In the beginning, when you do real change, you're really worried about effectiveness. Now you may come up with some ideas on how to do that, but now it's management's job to make it efficient and not to spend every dollar you possibly can in order to do it. But how do we do something more efficiently? So that to me is, I always remember that conversation Joe and I had about that. And that to me is really a defining cut line between leadership and management. And so I agree with you. I dropped the term followers. I don't use it anymore. Collaborators, partners is what I use as well. Partners is acceptable. And I agree with you. And I've had this difficulty myself. Post-industrial leadership is hard for people to wrap their heads around. It really is. It becomes somewhat esoteric in the way what does that really mean? So I spoke to Joe about this, and we agreed that collaborative leadership would work because it's a leadership model based on collaboration. Collaborative leadership. Another term I use is right from Joe's book, 21st century leadership.
Yes.
Because there is recognition now of 21st century leadership, and it means a lot of different things. It's different than the way we had done leadership in the 20th century, which I now refer to. And of course, we're always trying to find the right words. I am trying to find the right words to help people understand the shift. So what I use now is 1950s factory floor leadership. That's the terminology I use. I'll just do what you need to do. But here's the thing I would say, we'll move on to another question in a minute. We have been waiting. Okay, let me go back a minute. The job of the leader, one of the jobs, the inherent jobs of a leader that we have given to leaders, that we expect from leaders, is certainty. We expect leaders to be certain about things. So there's a certainty about leaders. They're the leaders. They have the information. They're certain. So when they tell us to do something, it comes out of certainty.
Yeah.
Okay. Except That's not the world we live in today.
Yeah.
The world we live in today is full of doubt and ambiguity. And lately, I've been talking about the need for people and organizations to embrace doubt and ambiguity. And the reason goes back to your original point. Because when you have doubt and ambiguity, you kick the doors open to collaboration because people don't know. I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. Well, maybe we should get a group of people together and figure it out. Oh my God, what a concept. Here comes collaboration, whether you like it or not, because leaders don't have the certainty. And certainly now in this world of rapid change, rapid complex change, fueled by AI and artificial intelligence and all the tools, people, the democratization of knowledge and information to anyone. Now, the issue is the leader does not necessarily have certainty anymore. So now, when you have this democratization of knowledge, I'm sure Joe would just be reveling right now, dancing in the streets, because it created the context, the conditions under which the door is wide open now for collaborative or post industrial leadership. I'd love to get your reflection on that.
Yeah, you said a lot there. You mentioned Burns earlier, and I can't seem to get my mind off of Burns right now. So I'm going to try to maybe link the two things together. And who am I? I'm just this guy sitting here in Indianapolis. But Burns, yes, he did breathe. Let's say he breathed life back into the field with something, let's say, new and different. But he was still grounded in leader centricity. And one of the last statements that he was being interviewed at the university that he was at, which I can't remember right
University, I think it was University of Maryland.
now.
He was at the University of Maryland.
And the interviewer says, after all these years, after all the ink spill, what's your definition of leadership? And he said, leadership is followership and followership is leadership. And it just floored me. He was still under the influence of that paradigm. I don't remember. I think he died in 2016 or something like that, maybe. But Ross, in one of his final papers, it might have been 2008, I think the same year that he died, he focused on collaboration. He even called it collaborative leadership. And there's a sentence, which I won't be able to remember word for word, but he said, some people are considering removing the word leader from the definition, but he said, I, meaning him, I'm not there yet. And I believe that if he had hung around, he might have come to the same conclusion. That word is the problem. It's too bad that we don't have another word, but the biggest problem with the word leadership is that it starts with the word leader. Now, we can change the word, but if we do, then we'll never have the real paradigm shift that we need, because that word will always be there, and the leadership industry will just keep on going. They predict it's going to double again in size, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. It's going to double in size in the next 10 years. And it's the old, obsolete, leader-centric industrial paradigm. And we have to change that, but as Karl Popper said, I believe it was Popper, maybe it was Kuhn, a paradigm doesn't really shift until the old generation dies off. So that's why I'm focusing on the younger generation, the kids that are in school now. We've got to get this ingrained. We have to help them understand the new paradigm, because that's what's going to usher in and ultimately advance that new paradigm.
It's interesting. There was an attempt to replace the word, and I can't think of the author's name, but he wrote a book called Stewardship. So that was the best attempt, or one attempt. I would say the best attempt. And I think the way Joe looked at leader and the way I look at leader too, and I think it's hard to remove that word, is this. I see a leader as perhaps the initiator. The leader is the initiator or the facilitator of the leadership dynamic. And I think, but I make a differentiation in the training because of my work. And that is the difference between leader development. I say leader development, okay? In other words, most of the stuff that's 95% of what we're doing today and what we have done is leader development.
Yes.
But here's the missing piece. Leadership, to me, is the practice and action of the leadership dynamic of people working together to create real change. Okay, that's the way I've decided to split it. And I think it works for me, certainly. And that is that you can train the leader, and this is the thing that I think has helped me in this sense. Just as you pointed out, what other science has 200 definitions of anything, right? You pointed that. This is really true. I have a colleague who I quoted in my book who has spent 20 years collecting models and definitions of leadership. The last time I talked to him, his number was 646. So you sit back and say, oh, come on, you guys got to be kidding me. In any case, what I've tried to say is, okay, look, leader development, okay, I'll buy that. Oh, it's okay. All right. But now, and again, in any science, now what do you do with that? How do you apply that? What do you do with it? Leadership to me is doing, okay? It's practice and action, okay? So now you've been trained, go do something with it. And I call it the conversion factor. Can you convert the knowledge you've gained in leader development and actually do something with it, okay? And people go, oh, yeah, you can go to school and go to medical school and get medically trained. But are you a surgeon? Can someone call you a surgeon? After you've done 100 or 1,000 operations, yeah, you've taken the knowledge and you put it into action. We accept that.
Yes.
An engineer, you could learn civil engineering. Can you build a bridge? We accept that in every other discipline except leadership. And I think part of the problem, there's two problems that I've seen. Number one is the psychologists and the psychiatrists got in there first. And they captured the emotion of the individual leader, number one. And when did that happen? It really happened in the 50s, is really when it started to grow. And in the 50s, what many people don't remember, was right after World War II.
Yeah.
And after World War II, we had flooded the Ruhr River Valley in Germany and put them out of business, and we had nuked Japan. So the only one who was shifting their incredible industrial base that had now been shifted from war materials to peacetime to refrigerators and truck axles was the United States of America. And anything we made, we sold. Anything we made, we sold because the world was hungry for products. Mm-hmm. And that's when leadership grew up. That's when leadership wait a minute, this leadership thing, it's a one person, it's the leader. So those two dynamics that came together, the psychological perspective and the aftermath of World War II, really was responsible for creating the leader as the leadership bestower, if you will, who bestowed leadership on everybody. I don't know if you have any reflections on that.
I mean, there's so much here. You and I could go on for hours, but so quickly, there's been a major push to try to change the word, obviously, for quite a few years. You mentioned stewardship. Mintzberg talks about communityship, and there's many others. Almost any adjective that you can put in front of the word leadership creates a new model. And these are good attempts. The people are really trying to do something, but they're still really entrenched in the leader centricity. For example, Kellerman talks about leader-follower context. So you still have that tripod concept of the leader-follower goal. Joe Raylan has come out with the leadership as practice, but it's still very leader-centric. There's another group, they call it DAC, D-A-C, direction, alignment, commitment. So there's all these attempts to change the word, but really the word has to be the same word. We have to change the meaning of the word, not change the word. The classic example, and I hope I can describe this correctly, is the word marriage. Marriage always had a definition for maybe thousands of years until there were some people who didn't fit that definition. But they did not want another word to describe their union. They wanted the same word. So changing the word, I don't think would help. One other quick thing. You mentioned the 50s. You're absolutely correct. But another very detrimental thing happened in 1977 when Abraham Zeleznik wrote his unscientific paper in HBR, Leaders and Managers, Are They Different? 1977. There were no references in the paper. He made all these statements that a leader and a manager are two actually different people, different psyches and everything. It raised or elevated leadership and it demeaned management. That doesn't get us anywhere. I hope that as time goes on, the industry, I'm talking about the academic leadership establishment, somehow makes the shift, because both can live at the same time. Like you're saying, you can have a leader, that's fine, but that's not leadership. You can have leader development, that's fine, but that's not leadership development. I think they're afraid of making the shift because I believe they know that something has to happen. I hope that something actually does happen in my lifetime, in our life.
And I would absolutely want to add to this, and that is Ira Chalif's The Courageous Follower, who is just, again, doing the same thing, inculcating this mindset that followership still exists. I vehemently disagree with him. In fact, I almost got a chance to, in 2010, debate him, but it was turned into something other than a debate, just a panel discussion, and I only got 10 minutes. I won't go into that because it's still a sore spot with me, but I agree with you. But here's the good news. I believe in my heart, because I watch this stuff very closely. The change is in progress. The change is happening. And it is the Gen Zs, the younger generations, that are now understanding this dynamic of people working together. And I think they see leadership as something much more. I'm about ready to publish my field report. It's called Throttle Up from the Field, Volume 1, The Canaries in the Coal Mine. The workforce crisis Gen Z is exposing. And I liken Gen Z to canaries in the coal mine. When coal miners took canaries into the coal mine, they did it because they knew that if a canary flopped over, it was time to get out of the mine, because they had very sensitive breathing systems, canaries did. And what I'm finding in my work, and that is 3 international reports plus my podcast episodes, 18 of my podcast episodes, that converge at the same point. And that is that there are 3 missing links in organizations that actually help create a better engagement, mitigate the disengagement crisis. And the 3 of them are values alignment, personal agency, people have the power to act on their level, and growth trajectory. In other words, a pathway to growth. And we oftentimes, and I see this all the time, we lay the problems at the feet of people and say, oh, if the people could just change, if they would be better. What Gen Z is showing us is that the mind is toxic. And it's not just toxic for them, because they won't put up with it. They won't put up with it. If they're not in line or the values are different, they'll leave. Even if they don't have anything in hand, they'll go. But this has been toxic for all of us. That's what makes them the canary. Mm-hmm. That all we did as baby boomers was put up with it. We got a job. We put up with it. I like to tell the story of my recently passed fraternity brother who spent 42 years in the same job in Wall Street. Not in the same job, same company in Wall Street, 42 years. Go look for those people. They're as rare as hen's teeth. And we don't have any of those people laying around anymore. But that's the thing. We put up with it. People just did with it. They liked, but Gen Z is saying, no, you don't have to put up with it. It's toxic. It's the thing that makes you sick. And millennials found a way around it. They just put up with it in a different way. But in any case, I digress a little bit here. What I want to do is get back to just talking a little bit this morning about what you're involved in. Let me ask you this if I can. Your lead program has reached over 2,000 participants. What's the moment in that journey of discovery where you see the light bulb go on? Where someone stops managing and starts actually leading?
I'll try to respond without necessarily disagreeing with one of the words you use, but let's see how this goes. So, for the first, maybe since around 1990 until about 2015, the lead program that I developed was always presented to people in the company that I was working with. I didn't establish the institute until I retired. And that's when I began to offer the lead program publicly and then to other companies. So there's two different things going on. When I was working with people in the company that I was actually employing with, I could visually see things happening. And these were large companies. They were, let's say, multi-site, sometimes international. But I had a bird's eye view, to use the bird analogy, to see things actually change. The lead program has to be delivered to all levels of management, from the top person, whoever that is, could be the president, the CEO, the general manager, whoever, down to the lowest level of a supervisor, because if you don't do that, nothing happens. When I converted, or when I retired and then began to deliver the lead program to other companies, that was one of the criteria, and many companies didn't want to do that. So I didn't have a very thriving business. I had a base, but nothing really to write home about. And now in the public domain, I don't really see that firsthand. However, another critical element of the LEAD program is post-program coaching. It's not standard coaching. It's not performance coaching, personal development coaching, or executive coaching. This is called cognitive coaching, where we help people to internalize and integrate the principles that are learned, scientific principles that are learned in the LEAD program. So where I see the public domain now, the shift, is when I'm coaching people, because the coaching consists of one coaching call, 1 hour call per month for 6 months. So I'm able to see, by talking to people, then develop, then begin to make the paradigm shift, because the LEAD program is based on a paradigm, principle, practice framework. The paradigm has to shift first. And then the principles, which are scientific principles, there happens to be 72 in the LEAD program. 5 of them are called foundational principles. And the bedrock principle is the similarity principle, which states that we are much more similar than different. But the point is that, so I've seen it both ways. I've seen it in real life, and then I now see it. But I don't see it until the people go through the coaching process. Usually by the 3rd or 4th month, there's a real change, a real cognitive restructuring of how they think. And the whole LEAD program is based on cognition, not behavior, because all behavior is preceded by our cognition.
Not only that, but people don't really understand, as I like to say, the difference, the fundamental understanding of what behavior is. And that is an unconscious reflective action.
Yeah, mostly.
Okay, so how do you change behavior? You need cognition, and you need to create new habits. You need to take action in order to say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to slow down and I'm actually going to change my approach. I always talk about the rule of seven.
Yeah.
The rule of seven says you have to take action and create a new habit and do it 7 times before it sticks. And the rule, as I call it, the rule of seven. Sometimes it takes the rule of 10 or 12, but beside the point, that you have to actually knowingly take subjective actions to change the objective behavior, in a manner of speaking. And a lot of people don't understand that. And all they do is what you see all the time is, well, change your behavior. You need behavioral change. Okay, how do you do that? Tell me how do you think I should change my behavior? Nothing makes me crawl up the wall more than just that notion of change behaviors. Okay, fine. What does that mean to you? Tell me what that means. What does that look like to you? What do you have to do? And they really don't understand the mechanics of behavioral change. So it's just that's my lashing out at behavioral change. I'm sorry, but that's
Well, you said
go ahead.
something a bit early. You said something a bit earlier, so I don't want to lose that part
Okay.
of. You talked about a habit. A habit is a thought, so it's both the mechanics of behaving differently, but you can do that indefinitely. If you don't change the underlying thought structure, then it's not genuine for one thing, and it's not going to stick.
Yeah, I agree. And you have to knowingly, in a sense, force yourself to make the change. And you have to do it. You have to do it because call it muscle memory, if
Just
you will.
remember.
Yeah, in a sense, like, oh, wait a minute, I used to do this. I tell people all the time, and I'm still working on it every day. I used to be a terrible listener, man, terrible.
Wow.
You couldn't there's no one who was worse listener than me. I had to slow myself down. I had to say, don't do that. Don't listen. Listen all the time. Am I perfect? No. Have I gotten a lot better? Oh, yeah. I've gotten a lot better. Podcasting will make you a lot better. I'll tell you
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Interestingly enough. Yeah.
I bet.
Because when you're podcasting, you have to learn how to be still
Yeah.
and let the other person talk, which I try to do my best on most of the time. But let me ask you a question. Okay, let me ask you this question as we get closer to the end. Fair enough? Okay.
Mhm.
Your recent article in Cadmus argues for reconceptualizing leadership entirely. And we've been talking about that back and forth here. What's the one assumption in that article you think make the most people uncomfortable? And why does that discomfort matter? What is the one thing that makes people uncomfortable?
It's probably more obvious than some people might think. The whole thing is based on underlying assumptions. We have certain beliefs and assumptions about things. And assumption is so powerful, it's actually unbelievable. It's hard to describe. We can see evidence of it even in the animal kingdom, when let's say that there's a baby elephant in captivity in a zoo or in a circus, they chain the baby's elephant leg to like a stake in the ground, maybe like a 3-foot iron stake, and the baby cannot escape. As the baby grows into a full-grown elephant, they still tie its leg to the stake, and it doesn't escape, even though it could. So the power of assumptions is across all types of life forms. But the other thing is the assumption becomes your belief system, which becomes your identity. It's actually part of who you think you are. And then we are making a statement, let's say, or we're either criticizing or questioning, challenging an assumption. And I believe that's the toughest thing. Assumptions have to be challenged and changed from time to time. Jokingly, we say that an assumption is like a diaper to change it from time to time for the same reason. But that is very difficult. It's difficult for you, for me, for anybody. But we have to get beyond that. And that's the hardest part about this. And you can't do it directly. In other words, you and I agree much more, infinitely more than we disagree. But let's just say we didn't. and I tried to change your mind or you tried to change my mind directly, it doesn't work. The opposite comes out of it. So we've got to figure out a way, and it's hard to do in a paper, but in an educational setting, there are ways to get around it. As I mentioned, when you realize that your definition of something is wrong, we're not saying that. You're realizing it yourself. That's a big difference. So I would say that's the hardest thing to do. And in a paper, it's almost impossible to do. And that's part of the problem with the academic establishment. They don't want to hear this stuff. There's so many new approaches. Just think about it. Distributed leadership, shared leadership, complexity theory, leadership as practice. These are coming out all the time. But if you read these papers carefully, you realize they're still immersed in the leader-centric mindset.
And I agree with you. That's the assumption. It's one of the reasons why I love simulations. The kind of simulation that I do is rooted in the change.
Yes.
You say, okay, here's a realistic scenario. You're in with a group of 4, 5, 6, 7 stakeholder groups. Here's the problem, and the press are going to come and interview you in 20 minutes. Solve this problem. Oh, by the way, bring your assumptions. Bring your assumptions. I want you to use the assumptions that you have. Do it. And when they all of a sudden they realize they're beating against a door that won't open because their assumptions are wrong, and yet they're trying to solve this realistic problem, then they have to take a step back and say, maybe I need to change my assumption about what really works and what doesn't work. And that's always been one of the foundation elements of simulation, along with being equipped with ambiguity, complexity, ambiguity, and empathy. Okay. So in other words, in the simulation, I put people in roles they would not normally play. Let them walk in someone else's shoes and feel that. Feel it. Feel what it feels like when you're the one who thinks they're in power and you're no longer in power. How does that feel? And that's where you see the Goldman and empathy and emotional intelligence come alive, because people really grasp onto that. I agree with you. And I also agree with you wholeheartedly that educational institutions are the last ones to change. They just are so ensconced in the way they've done business. They're not risk takers per se. Let's take a risk. It's only every once in a while you'll see a few of them step out and do something different. But again, they still are operating with a basic leadership is what one leader gives us. But I think it's crumbling. I really believe it's crumbling, and eventually it will go away, and people will understand that leadership is really a network. It's a network of collaborators working together to make change. So we'll see how that works itself out. We're getting real close to the end. Actually, we've reached the end. I want to ask you one real quick question. Where do you see your work and the Institute going in the future? What's your hope for the future?
As I said earlier, most of my focus is going to be on writing. I have a couple of colleagues that will probably take over more of the training side. But the future, I really believe, and your comment heartens me because you talked about the next generation. I'm convinced that it's got to be the next generation. We're not going to change this generation. It's the classic example of what Q said, that within the paradigm itself, science does not advance. It only accumulates. All this stuff is just an accumulation. To make that shift, I don't think it can be done with the current state. And I just came to this realization recently, by the way, and now we're looking toward that new generation. In fact, I hope to be going to the Association of Leadership Educators Conference in July, and that's the message I'm going to hopefully take there. I'm an outsider. I don't consider myself a classical academic, although I taught for 35 years, but that group has to know that the paradigm shift is sitting in their classrooms.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's a great message right there. It's right in front of you, and you fail to see it or recognize it. But anyway, I appreciate it. Matt, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate the time. You're right. We could go on for days. We'd be here till midnight tonight, just trading different ideas or perspectives and what we think about this, what we think about that. But it's been great. When I first connected with you, I was just blown away by, you mean there's another person like me? I can't believe it. I thought we were extinct in a lot of respects. But so it's been great catching up with you and also with conversing with you today. So I really appreciate it. Listen, I wish you every good health, every success for you and the Institute and your colleagues in the future. Thank you so very much for giving me your time today.
Thank you. I feel blessed knowing you.
The same here. This is Dr. John Dentico. Remember, meaning is the new money, but it requires building the structures that deliver it. If today's conversation challenged your thinking or gave you a framework worth implementing, share it with a leader who needs to hear it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit throttleupleadership.com for more resources. Until next time, keep throttling up and keep the people at the center of everything you do.